Good morning, everyone, and welcome to session 3 of the Business School Leaders Forum, brought to you by GoToWebinar by LogMeIn. I'm happy to be joined by Himanshu Rai, Director at Indian Institute of Management, Indore, who will be presenting on redefining social impact. In a moment, I'm going to pass over to Himanshu, but just before I do, I'd like to let everyone know that there'll be a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please type those into the question tab, and we'll hopefully answer as many as we can towards the end. Himanshu has kindly agreed that any unanswered questions, he'll follow up with you with his answers. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Himanshu.
Thank you, Paul, and very good morning or good evening to everyone, wherever you are. I hope all of you are safe and healthy in these testing times. Now, why did we think about talking about redefining social impact? That is because of certain historical reasons. If you look at management education and business schools in particular, classically and traditionally, they have had their focus on technical skills. Whereas, given the times that we live in, I think it is time for us to completely redefine management education itself. The part of it is going to happen if we redefine what we really mean by social impact. I'm going to speak for about 40-odd minutes, and then, as Paul pointed out, I'll be very happy to take questions, if any. Now, if you look at the past paradigms, management education focused on technical aspects, and the entire objective of management education was developing business acumen. I'm going to take you a little bit down the history. So, business schools started in the form of university chairs, and it started as early as 1727 in Germany, then 1750 in Sweden. A business school or a university chair with a particular objective actually started in Lisbon after the Lisbon earthquake, 1755. And the objective at that point of time was to train public administrators actually manage taxes. Subsequently, we once again, if we look at Europe, in Moscow, it started in 1804. The ESCP in Paris started in 1819. Then we had the schools of commerce coming in. Once again, where schools of commerce were actually looked at as what business schools are today. We had one in Vienna, the other in Budapest, which is where we were supposed to be today, in 1856. Venice in 1868, and then it went over to the US, where we had Wharton coming in 1881 and Harvard in 1908. However, the focus of all of these were basically very, very technical in nature, and the entire objective was to bring these functions together to help the businesses. Now, if I look at leadership within the premise of the business schools, the history of leadership is also very, very interesting. The courses on leadership focused basically on strategic management, which means different elements of management brought in together, different functions brought it together, and a major part of leadership courses actually dwelled on how can a leader influence people. Because the entire conceptualization that business schools have had of leaders actually started with looking at leaders as heroes or martyrs. There was a cause which either a person fought, it could have been an organizational cause or a national cause, or the person gave up his life or her life. And therefore, looked at leaders from a hero or a martyr perspective. Consequently, the theories of leadership or the courses of leadership which were taught looked at the elements of charisma, looked at the elements of influencing, looked at the elements of persuading. So we looked at leaders as such. We also found out there was a dark side, the entire conceptualization of charismatic leadership. Now, I know that I'm preaching to the choir. I think we need to put this into perspective, understand as to why do we need to redefine the things that we are talking about today. We moved from leaders to leadership, and then we started talking about transactional and transformational leaders. We also talked about the emergence of leaders in forms of the trait theory, the situational theory, and then the behavioral theory. Eventually, what we said was that leadership is a process by which a person influences others to accomplish an objective. and directs the organization in such a way that makes it more cohesive and coherent. Now, there were some problems in this definition of leadership which stayed with us for a very, very long time. And we ran into the problems many years later when we realized that there was something which was missing. And what was it that was missing? If you look at this definition of leadership, it merely talks about a particular objective. It does not talk about the kind of objective that a leader should actually strive to gain. It talks about making a team more cohesive and coherent. It does not talk about the terminal values for which a team should be formed in the first place. And this was very well reflected by the mission statements of the business schools. I mean, look at the early endeavors. I'm not going to read all of them, but let me focus on two of them. The vision of a stimulating, fulfilling, and supporting environment encourage the development of the expertise of all our staff through research, scholarly activity, consultancy, and training. Let's look at another one. Undertake research and to provide education in subject areas relating to accounting, business studies, and economics to develop and foster individuals' analytical capabilities. In this aim, we seek to confer on our students a lifelong perspective for guidance in the understanding of the complicated world of human society. The moral of the story is that the mission of business schools, the mission of management education, at best, was to produce leaders who help fulfill organizational goals and objectives. There was absolutely no talk about the core values. There was absolutely no talk about engagement with the communities. There was absolutely no talk about actually looking at the relationship between the schools and the environment or the ecosystem that they work in. And therefore, the focus was merely on skills, resourcefulness, and efficiency, whereas things like ethics, values, and responsibility were given a short shrift. Social impact was limited to training leaders, some bit of policy research perhaps, and some courses on social and political environment. In fact, when I joined my business school, and this was in the year 2000, there were only two courses which actually talked about any kind of social or political impact. There was a course called Social and Political Environment in India, and there was another course which actually helped people focus on themselves, figure out as to what their value systems was. It was called Explorations in Roles and Identities. But beyond that, I don't think there was much which was done in terms of either creating a social impact, let alone trying to measure what kind of a social impact we were talking about. Now, very interestingly, it was the first decade of the new century that put a spanner into the works of how business schools work. Allow me to take you through these three of the several incidents when businesses breached trust. The Enron scandal in 2001, $74 billion worth of losses to shareholders before bankruptcy. It was a serious accounting and bank fraud. Not only led to the bankruptcy of the company and serious legal impairment, also ruined the reputation of Arthur Andersen, the big five accounting firms, eventually driving it out of business. 85,000 employees of Arthur Andersen LLP lost their jobs. 20,000 Enron employees affected. And then move over to 2008, subprime crisis. The crisis, which started with the bursting of the housing bubbles, grew up to unbelievable proportions. Deep recession in the US, tremors were felt all over the world economy, and exposed the loopholes of the regulatory framework and management practices. The stats: nearly 9 million people lost their jobs in 2008 and 9, and millions of households foreclosed. The GDP declined by 4.3%. And this was also the time when things were happening in India as well. There was something called the Satyam scam. Here, 2008, the chairperson, B. Ramalingam Raju of Satyam, which is one of the most respected companies in the world, here was a leader was very well respected in the business fraternity in India, he confessed of accounting manipulations by rupees 7,136 crores. That is two myriad ways, like showing non-existential staff, draw funds in the names of salaries. Now, not only did it affect the shareholders and employees, the company itself was sold off and it was taken over by another organization, the Mahindras. The auditor of Satyam, PricewaterhouseCoopers, was barred by the Indian government to provide auditing services to any listed company in India for 2 years. The GDP of India went down by 0.4%, and it was said that this scam was seen as the major cause. The irony of it all was that the word Satyam, it's a Sanskrit word which, when translated into English, means truth. And truth was the victim in this entire scam. And therefore, highly skilled leaders with poor ethical standards may cause much more harm than good, was one of the conclusions that was drawn post 2008. And I think there was some serious attempt which was made in the post 2008 world, because we started evolving perspectives on leadership. We started looking at leadership in a slightly different way. Let me remind you again, earlier we had defined leadership as a process by which a person influenced others to accomplish an objective and directed the organization in such a way that made it more cohesive and coherent. And one of the things people realized was that nowhere in this definition was there a moral compass. Nowhere in this definition was there a word about values, be they instrumental or terminal. Nowhere this entire discourse on leadership was the ethical content coming in. And personally, I had another experience at that point of time, and this is 2008, right after the Satyam scam. I was new into the world of academia, which I had joined in 2005. I used to teach leadership. And every time I would talk about that particular definition that I spoke to you about, I would ask my participants, can you name a leader who actually matches this definition? I would get the usual people like Gandhi, like Mandela, like Cook, amongst the more contemporary ones. But at the same time, I would also get the villains of the history. I would also get the dictators, the autocrats, the killers of history. When I started looking at those names being said the same breath, the Gandhi and Mandela, I realized that the problem was not with the people who were naming them. The problem was with the definition itself. Just pick up any villain in the history. He or she is likely to match that definition when we talk about objectives without any value, when we talk about passion without talking about compassion, and when we talk about making everyone cohesive and coherent without talking about the direction in which the leader is trying to take the team. And therefore, it was felt that we need to start talking about ethical aspects of leadership. The vision necessarily has to have ethical content to it all. However, even today, when we look at the kind of things that came in, what we eventually did with the leadership courses was we tried to talk about the ethical elements from a philosophical viewpoint. We tried to talk about right and wrong. It was left on the individual to make a decision coming from any of the theories, be it the consequentialism, be it the deontological, or be it hedonism, so on and so forth. But we did not look at leadership impact on the society around us. And therefore, my suggestion and my argument today here is that from the ethical definition, from the ethical aspects of leadership, we now need to move towards responsible leadership. Responsible leadership, to me, is responsibility towards and value creation for communities, societies, stakeholders, as well as environment. And we need to go beyond leadership development courses and programs in their current form. Why? Because currently we are talking about behavioral aspects, we are talking about social responsibility, we are talking about sustainable development, we are not talking about real-time problem-solving experience, the local or the community level problems. We are not talking about measuring how effective we are in whatever we do for the society, if at all we are doing something. And therefore, allow me to reflect on the roots. Let me come back to the purpose of management education. Earlier, whenever we said management education, we said management education is all about creating leaders who can run organizations. In fact, it wasn't even creating leaders, it was creating managers who can run organizations. The purpose of the management education, even today, is limited to creation, advancement, and dissemination. There are two things I would like to point out over here. One is that by and large, historically, business schools and management education has not really practiced what we have preached. At my own institution, I would say mea culpa, we were also guilty of that. We did create knowledge, we did advance knowledge, we did disseminate knowledge, but we did not practice the same knowledge. We did not practice the same principles within our institutions that we were trying to teach the entire world. And therefore, now what we have to see is, how can we take management education? How can we take the creation, advancement, practice, and dissemination of knowledge for solving real world problems so that we can make life easier and create value in terms of social impact that we may possibly have? Let me point out some of the institutions which are already doing that, and this is by reconstituting the mission statement. So I think all of us, if we wish to redefine social impact, the first thing that we will need to recreate, first thing we will need to reimagine is our mission statement itself. Consider the following mission statements of some leading organizations. Allow me to explain as to how does it go beyond what was there traditionally. General Electric, usher in the next industrial era and to build, move, power, and cure the world. We are talking about a universe. We're talking about imagining a universe which is better. We're talking about imagining a universe which is more equal. Microsoft Corporation, empower every person, every organization on the planet achieve more. We're talking about helping individuals to realize their own potential. We're talking about helping others actually achieve what they are dreaming about. Tata Group, improve the quality of life of the communities we serve through long-term value creation based on leadership with trust. We are talking about trust, and we are not talking about a trust which is based out of deference, but we are talking about a trust which is based on knowledge and identification. Harvard Business School, which has now come up with to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. And therefore, what we are also realizing is that so far we had limited ourselves to courses. Perhaps of late, I have seen a lot of courses which have come talking about corporate social responsibility. There are courses which are talking about climate change, courses on crisis leadership, there are courses on justice, especially with Professor Michael Sandel's course in Harvard becoming extremely popular. There's a lot of research which is happening talking about how can we actually make climate more ethical. At IIM Indore itself, we decided to have our mission statement as to be a contextually relevant business school with world-class standards, academic standards that develop socially conscious managers, leaders, and entrepreneurs. Herein lies the crux, socially conscious. This is what I wish to talk about. How can we redefine the social impact? As I said, so far, we had not concerned ourselves with the problems of the community that we lived in. We had not concerned ourselves with the problem that our region or the country faced. We had concerned ourselves by talking about first managers and subsequently leaders who can perhaps create a change without actually trying to advocate what kind of a change it was that we were looking at. What was that change that we wanted to bring about in the world? And to what extent were we actually able to do so? And therefore, I'll just give you an example. Now, this is not specific to what we at IIM Indore are doing. This is a general script which I believe can actually help people, can actually help business institutions such as ours redefine social impact, the way we look at it. So, for example, if I were to look at India, the challenges that confront us are income disparity. India, the difference between the haves and the have-nots, between the poor people and the rich, the top economic indicators, is too huge. The income disparity and the inequality in India is huge. There is absolutely little or no growth in the rural areas. Environment is posing a problem everywhere, and India is not indifferent to it. So, for example, if you look at the environment, we all know that we cannot afford to have the global temperatures rise above 2 degrees centigrade. And to keep it at 2 degrees centigrade, we cannot afford to have more than 800 gigatons of greenhouse gases in there. And we already have close to 560 to 570 gigatons of greenhouse gases over there. Now, I know that the developed countries have started reducing their carbon emissions, and developing countries like my own have increased the carbon emission. Once again, we cannot look merely at the issue of the incremental carbon emission. We also have to look at the issue of the stock which is already there, for the simple reason that even by some miracle we stop carbon emission, we stop the greenhouse gas emission and bring it to zero tomorrow, even then the global warming will continue to happen because the greenhouse gases take almost 80 to 100 years to dissipate. Are we as business schools doing something about it? Are we actually addressing this particular problem? And in India, at least, we have started addressing this problem and started taking it very, very seriously. Lack of entrepreneurship was another thing that confronts India. And India, the micro, small, and medium industries form the backbone of the Indian economy. Yet, very little was being done by the business schools. All the initiatives, if at all there were any, were actually led by the government, but none by the business schools in India. And then, of course, we had lots of urban problems. So how did we decide as an institution to create a social impact? I'd spend some time on that, and then we will take the discussion to what can institutions do in general, and are there any lessons that can be learned from this? When we talk about tackling income inequality, we are essentially talking about income inequality not merely in terms of the poor and the rich, but also in terms of regions. So, for example, India with its 28 states, there are some states which are economically prosperous, as there are some states which are very, very backward. And therefore, what we did was we picked up the largest state in India, Uttar Pradesh, and we picked up one particular district, which was our pilot district. And there was a government scheme called One District, One Product. So what we said was, there are 75 districts in this particular state. Each district had something that they were good at in terms of what they produce. So there was one district which was very good at handicrafts. There was one district which was very good at processing food. There was another district which was very good at actually doing things with jaggery, so on and so forth. And therefore, what we did was we said, we will pick up one district and we will help them manage their businesses. We picked up all the entrepreneurs of that particular district, got them together, and these are the small entrepreneurs. These are the small entrepreneurs. The people even at the village level who are trying to form some kind of a cooperative society. They have absolutely no access to the big banks. They had no access to the markets. They were not digitally savvy. So we created a platform for them. We brought them in touch with the banks. We helped them in getting the loans. We helped them in expanding the business. And now, once we have managed to do this, we did this over a period of 6 months. We've been asked to replicate the same model in 4 other districts. And hopefully, we will then take it to the entire country. Now, this was trying to help people who hitherto were not organized to become organized. And in that sense, and during that process, also help them making more money and becoming financially independent. And not just that, we also started a financial literacy class for all of these people who were illiterate, educated, because they did understand the business well, and also who were willing to get into entrepreneurial things, not only those who were already into entrepreneurship, but even those who had certain kind of entrepreneurial motivation. And we helped them with financial literacy, starting with very small things like making their home budgets, trying to find out what their expenditure was, trying to find out what was the gap between their income and expenditure, and then helping them in understanding the slightly more higher nuances of financial management. Now, Once again, what we did was we also tried to measure, did we actually help raising the income of the people? And that data was taken by the district administrator, who you can see standing next to me in the picture in the center. Much to our delight, we did make a difference, albeit a small difference, but we did make a difference in the income levels of that particular district, which we had taken as a pilot district. The second was environment. As I said, that most of the business schools, mine included, did not practice much of what we preached. For example, when I came into this particular school, when I took over the position of the dean of the school, we had absolutely no control over the amount of plastic that we had. We had absolutely no control over the amount of wastages that we had. We did not have any renewable sources of energy. And therefore, we said the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to do ourselves what we expect from the rest of the world and what we teach in our classrooms. The first thing we did was no plastic. All single-use plastic was banned throughout the campus. We have now started shifting to solar power. At the moment, we have only 10% of our power coming from renewable energy, but we intend to take it to 100%. And the expansion of the school has been planned in a zero energy way, in the sense that all the energy would be renewable energy, and there will be no water which will be wasted. 100% of water will be recycled. We went for massive greenification of the campus, planted thousands of trees. We also upgraded something and created something called a dog shelter, where we take care of the strays, not merely in the campus. Ours is a 200-acre campus. We had a lot of stray dogs. We put them all there. We take care of them. We take care of the health. We also take care of the dogs around the campus. If at all there is any dog injured, we bring them in. We have a veterinarian, we have a doctor, we have 5 or 6 volunteers who come in every day to even walk the dogs, play with the dogs, etc. We went for a zero waste kitchen. We used only biofuel. And there's another interesting thing that we did. Now, I can't really force the students who eat in the dining halls not to leave food on their plates. We can talk about it, but we can't fine them if they continue to do so. So what we did was we put a board outside all the dining halls where every day we would put in that this was the amount of food which was wasted the previous day. And this had its impact because the number in terms of the kgs, the kilos of food which was being wasted has consistently gone down. And likewise, when we talk about tree plantation, I measure, did we really achieve anything out of it? So our student volunteers once again took up a project, looked at the quality of air inside the campus as compared to the quality of air outside the campus. And there was a marked increase of 50% in the quality of air inside the campus. So once again, it is important not merely to do things which create a social impact, it is equally important to actually measure social impact that we are making. Encourage entrepreneurship. What we did was we did 3 things. One was we created something called the entrepreneurship cell. We started incubating ideas, and not just ideas coming from our students, but ideas coming from other people within the region as well. Now we're taking another step. We are going to create some kind of a corpus with which we are going to seed these ideas as well, at least in the early stages. We created a program specifically for the MSME sector, which is a micro, small and medium enterprises in this particular state of India, which is called the GMP, General Management Program for Executives, which is a highly subsidized program to train these people in skills related to management. And all the shops in the campus, we gave them away to the students. We said, why don't you run it? And once again, the impact of this is the students actually created profitable ventures. Now, when a batch passes out, they actually sell that venture to the incoming batch, whoever is interested. And every activity within the institution, be it shops to sell food, be it shops to sell other material, be it shops to sell material for the alumni, decorative items, etc., all of that is actually run by the students. The fourth element, and which was extremely important, was how do we do something for the villages in India? And here, once again, let me put things into perspective. Of the 1.33 billion people in India, 833 million people live in the rural areas. 833 million. That's more than the population of entire Europe, which would be about 720 million odd. And therefore, the problems that people in the rural India faced are very, very different from the problems in the urban India. In fact, many people said that there is this rural-urban divide in India, where the urban India has absolutely no clue about what the rural India does. And we had a program. We actually used to take our students to the villages so as to sensitize them. Then once again, what we realized was this is not enough. Merely sensitizing is not enough. We need to make students own the problems that the community faces. And this is the redefining of the social impact that I'm talking about. So starting from last year, the program which was called the Rural Immersion Program was reimagined and redefined as Rural Engagement Program. And under the Rural Engagement Program, all 636 students of ours went to 106 villages, different villages, in groups of 6, lived in those villages for 1 week, found out what were the problems which were being faced by the people in there, suggested solutions, actually had a brainstorming session with the villagers, tried to chalk out those solutions which were also sustainable so that once the students left, villagers could actually own up to those solutions, and then work with the district administration, keep looking at the progress even after they graduate. This was done, and we got a lot of support from the district administration of the particular district where we went and of the districts that we went to. And now there's a demand from us that we do similar programs for the rest of the country as well. Once again, all of this became possible simply because not only did we try to create a social impact, but we also tried to measure the impact that we were creating. So for example, what we did last time was we looked at the water problem. Every time what we have decided is we look at a particular issue. Once we looked at cleanliness, and then we looked at water. Next time we will look at power. Next time we will look at income, so on and so forth. In that ways, by actually focusing ourselves on a particular problem, we can actually provide solutions which are implementable and which are sustainable and also which are measurable. And finally, the last one was the urban problem. Now, this particular city, Indore, was known for traffic problems. In India, the extent of the traffic problem is that we have one traffic accident every minute, and we have one casualty, one person dead because of the traffic accident every 3 minutes. So this is the extreme extent of what traffic problems India faces and the number of casualties as a consequence of these traffic problems. So what we did was we created a small group of researchers over here. We picked up the city where we actually live in, Indore city, as the pilot city. And then we created a 5E framework called education, engineering, enforcement, emergency, and environment. And we looked at the traffic problem through these 5 lenses and then suggested a solution to the Indore city administration and to the police, the traffic police department of Indore. And then we also helped them in implementing it, starting from different road stretches. And every time we implemented it at a different road stretch, we actually looked at the impact, whether the number of accidents came down. Not only did the number of accidents come down, there was also a notable reduction in the noise pollution. I'm not too sure as to how many of you have actually visited India. One of the things that people really love doing over here is honking the horns. That itself is a source of noise pollution. All of that also came down by a substantial percentage. Of course, because of the COVID-19, we could not extend it to the other cities. But because of the impact that it created, we have now been approached by 5 other cities in India who have asked our institution, Indian Institute of Management, Indore, to actually implement this particular solution that we have in those 5 cities. The moral of all of this is to showcase that business schools can really contribute to the communities should they choose to. What we need to do is we need to identify as to what is it that we are really meant for. For example, a lot of students, even early into my academic career, they used to ask me, what is the purpose of a business? I would throw that question back to them. What do you think the purpose of the business is? And I would get answers like to create stakeholder value, to create income, to make profits, to help people, so on and so forth. And philosophically, I told them my idea would be, my thought would be that the purpose of any organization is to actually solve a problem in the society. It is actually addressing the need in a society. That need may be already there, or that need could be a need which is likely to arise, or a need which is felt by a few. And therefore, the idea of any business, the philosophy of any business has to be address that particular need. And I think it is time for us to now start redefining the mission statement of our business schools themselves. We can't be simply creating leaders. We have to also talk about what kind of leaders are we trying to create? What does responsible leadership mean? What does inclusive leadership mean? Are we taking care of the environment? We are talking about triple bottom line, but I think we have to talk about something which goes beyond that. We have to start advocating what kind of a world do we want to live in. I'm sure all of you are aware of what's happening throughout the United States the past 1 or 2 weeks. And therefore, I think this is the time for the business schools to also start thinking about what can we do. Do we hold a responsibility? My answer is yes. We hold a responsibility, and in fact, we placed very well to actually address these kind of issues, start the discussions within the institutions, start the discussions in fora such as these. And I'm sure that AMBA can actually create some kind of a forum which can look at what is it that we need to do as institutions of importance in the area of business. So we need to redefine mission statement. We need to develop responsible leaders. As I said, we need to define, first of all, what does responsibility mean? Because to me, when we talk about ethical leadership, while we are doing good, we are not doing enough. Responsibility also talks about responsibility to the universe around us, not just the environment, but also to the people. I was just discussing with Paul before we started this particular session that today, while many of us are trying to address the problems of COVID. So for example, here we have multiple research tracks which are going on, starting right from a predictive model which is going to predict as to what are the infected numbers going to be in India, how many beds would we need, how many ventilators would we need, how many how much of a shortfall would there be. We're looking at resilient leadership, the responses of leadership during the times of COVID. But we are not looking at, we are looking at the ways in which we would go online, but we are not looking at the problems which will be created by the solutions that we are suggesting. So for example, while it's a good idea to talk about going online, while it's a good idea to talk about blended programs, we are not looking at the problems which online education is likely to create. We were discussing that the way we are looking at the screen, the number of hours that we are looking at screen is likely to impact our health. And in any case, there is research which shows that the mental health, and that is a severely understudied phenomenon in most of the countries. The amount of impact COVID-19 is having on the mental health of people, it's something which is not being studied enough. And therefore, to me, responsible institutions and responsible leaders are those who also have the foresight to actually see as to the solutions that they are talking about. Do they encompass everything? Where does our responsibility stop? To what extent are we responsible? And I think we need to take far more responsibility as business institutions than we currently are doing. And then the third part, obviously, that we need to measure the social impact of whatever it is that we do. We as business institutions, we as institutions of excellence in the field of management education, by no means I'm trying to say that we haven't done good. I think it is time that we went beyond good. It is time that we also started defining what does good really mean. And I was fortunate enough to having started my corporate career with the Tatas. And the Tatas had a philosophy that said, what is good for India is good for the Tatas. Since I had that background when I came into academia, I would now say what is good for the world, what is good for the universe, is what is good for the business schools. And therefore, we need to start defining what can be good, what can be useful for the universe as a whole. And not just that, we need to start creating an impact. We need to start creating an impact today in our individual capacities, as institutions, and as a system. Now, one of the things I've always told people, this is something I tell my students in the class, if you leave your surroundings cleaner than you found them, if you leave people happier than when they actually met you, you have done your work as an individual. I think as business schools, I will go by the same philosophy. If we make our surroundings better, if we make the people who live around the community that we work in happier, we have done our job. In such time, we have even a single member of the community which is a part of the ecosystem getting left behind, not being included in decision making, not being included in prosperity, I think we would not have done a job as a business institution. I close this thing talking about what impact can it have. Now, philosophically, I do not want to look at any initiative which is related to social responsibility as being looked at a means to achieve some other end. Even if we want to look at it from a bigger perspective, it does help us to bridge the administration academia gap. We do interact with the corporate world, but we fail to interact with the administrative world. We fail to interact with the community in general. I think now we have to start talking about public, private, people partnership rather than only public-private partnerships. It brings communities closer. Because this is another impact that I've seen. The moment you start practicing what you teach, it brings communities closer. For example, when the COVID-19 pandemic took over in this particular region where we live in, the district administration reached out to us asking for our suggestion. They created a think tank where they included academics for the first time in the history of India. And not just that, even our students and the families who live, the community that lives within the campus, started doing voluntary work because we are in a state of lockdown. We continue to be in a state of lockdown. We have only 10% of the staff which is available inside the campus, and we have the entire campus to run. The community came forward and took over the responsibilities as security guards, as gardeners, as people who serve in the mess, and as people who clean and mop the entire academic block and the hostels, etc., etc. And therefore, it brings communities closer when they actually see you practicing what you have been talking in the classrooms. It attracts a very diverse pool of talents. It brings those people who have here on been excluded from this particular kind of education. It makes education not a privilege, but it makes it a right. The moment you have a diverse classroom, you will also have ideas that are diverse in nature and ideas which are going to be far more inclusive. It improves reputation and collective prosperity of the region, and also improves the impact factor, enhances rankings. As I said, these are merely some things which are automatically going to happen. I don't think business schools should be creating a social impact so that they achieve this. I think business schools should be creating a social impact because it is our responsibility. It is our institutional responsibility. It is also our individual responsibility. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave you with this particular picture to think about. In India, the festival, which is the most famous and celebrated by everyone, is called Diwali. It is a festival of light. It is a festival when the entire country lights up the lamps, distributes sweets, burst firecrackers, etc. There's a girl who did not have the money to buy the earthen lamps, did not have the money to buy the sweets, did not have the money to buy the crackers, but she just got a few things on her own. And the happiness which she saw which we can see on her face is worth everything that we can absolutely achieve. So ladies and gentlemen, please remember, if we can create many such girls, if we can bring smile to many such people who hereby have been left out in the economic prosperity or in the development, I think we as business institutions would have done our job. And for that, we need to not only create a social impact, we need to, in fact, redefine what does social impact mean. And we also need to redefine as to how are we going to measure that particular social impact. It cannot come merely in terms of numbers, it has to come in terms of the smiles that we put on the faces of the people. Thank you very much. I'm open to all the questions now, please.
Thank you, Himanshu. That was brilliant. So obviously, if anyone has got a question, feel free to type them in. We've had 2 come in. So I'll ask the first one. So how can you win the hearts and minds of students and faculty to take them on the social innovation journey?
So how to win the hearts is very, it's a very interesting question, for the simple reason that winning the hearts will come only later. The first thing that we need to do is to take some concrete steps towards social innovation. Are we really encouraging social innovation? Are we really providing opportunities to the students to create some kind of social innovation? And are we really geared to actually help and encourage people? So for example, again, I'll give you an example of the best practices that I've seen over here in India. One of the practices that we have is that we create a special track called the entrepreneurship track. So here what we have done is we have created a track called entrepreneurship track, where if a student chooses to get onto that track, we reduce the number of credits that the student has to do in the second year. So we have a 2-year MBA. We reduce the number of credits that the student has to do. What we do is we help the student incubate the idea, and we give them give students faculty mentors, and we help them actually taking that idea beyond. Now, the first time when we did this, there were only 2 students who picked this idea up out of 500 students. And that is the problem that I was talking about when I said there is a lack of interest in entrepreneurship so far as our country is concerned. And one of the reasons, then we did some kind of a deep dive and tried to figure out as to why are students not going into this particular track. And what we realized was that most of the students take study loans, fund their education when they come into the Indian Institute of Management, the Indian Institute of Management in our country. And therefore, their primary motive, the first thing that is bothersome to them is, how are we going to pay back that particular loan? What if we don't get a job? What if we don't get a job if the entrepreneurial venture fails? So therefore, we did 2 things. First thing we did was we asked the banks to increase the moratorium period and not to charge the interest for a couple of years. Unfortunately, the banks agreed. The second thing what we did was we assured the students that they can get into the entrepreneurial track, and if the entrepreneurial venture fails, they can come back into our system. We will help them actually find a job into our placement system, because one of the conditions of getting into the entrepreneurial track was that they had to forego the placement. As a part of our system, they could jolly well do it at an individual level, but institutionally they would be out of the placement system. So we said we will bring you back into the placement system, and the placement committee, which is again a student-led initiative, will help you in finding a job should you require a job after 2 years. So I think we have to find out what is it that actually hampers, or what is it that actually stops students from getting into that mode. This is so far as the student side is concerned. Can we address the problems because of which they do not step into something called the social, into the area of social entrepreneurship? How can faculty be driven? One of the things, what motivates the faculty? I think the joy of the students doing well, the joy that they get from looking at their work being published, their work getting disseminated. And I think there's a serious birth of, for example, journals which actually talk about social entrepreneurship. So one of the things that we can look at is, can we have more outlets so far as research in this particular area is concerned, so far as case studies in this particular area are concerned? Because the moment we start bringing those cases into the classrooms, that can actually spur a lot of people to get into something. And the third thing is, can we also ask our faculty to get into advocacy? Now, most of the business institutions actually find this a double-edged sword. If you get into advocacy, there are also chances that you might fall afoul of administration or the political establishments, etc. So while we have to be careful, while we have to be cognizant of the fact that we do not overstep our limits, I think it is time when we went for advocacy, even at an institutional level. And once we start doing that, I think that will bring in a culture where the faculty will also start talking about what is it that we need to do to actually spur social entrepreneurship, or at least ideas surrounding that particular thing. I hope I have
that was excellent.
Answered the question.
Thank you. So we've got another question. How do you integrate the curriculum requirements into your social projects, and what levels of planning are required?
Okay. So again, I'll give you the examples of what we have tried to do. So there are two elements to it. One is the classroom element, and the other is the practicing element or the experiential element. The first thing that we have done is we have created a lot of courses which actually try to integrate things by looking at the society as well. So for example, we have a course called Justice, Ethics and Morality. We also started a course called Leadership Through Literature, whereby looking at the literary books, we try to look at how societies have been shaped by literature, or how literature reflects the time and place element of a particular society, and what were the kind of leaders that actually made a difference. And through those literary discussions, we try to bring about themes which actually create a social impact. So one of the things, when I said that we do talk about passion, but we do not talk about compassion, was the result of one such theme that we brought about from the Leadership Through Literature course. So, and another course, as I said, Exploring Roles and Identities, where we help students realize who they are and what is it that they want to do with their lives. And this is achieved through process work, not through some kind of a normative framework where we tell them, okay, this is good and therefore you should do this. Not a prescriptive model, more of an exploratory model where they explore in groups as to what their role is towards the society, what their universe comprises of, and how are they related, and by virtue of that, what is their responsibility towards that universe. So these are the courses which we bring in the classroom, which try and integrate the questions of inclusiveness, the social and political environment, and the self, all of this. Second is the experiential part. So measurement in such courses, it becomes a little difficult because you have to ultimately grade the students. So we have tried to do multiple things. One is that we have tried to bring in those elements of assessment which actually measure whether the student really understood all of these and whether the student is really practicing all of this. So for example, the review. When we give an assignment or when we give a work, we ask students to evaluate each other. Now, I know that that is fraught with a different set of difficulties, but at least it's a step, it's an experimental step, and we'll try and figure out as to what we can do. The second way of assessment that we try to do in such courses is that the faculty would write a blog, and then the students were asked to respond to that blog. So we tried to replace, because there were many students who found it difficult to talk about certain issues in the classroom, but they found it easier to write about them. This is once again trying to understand, why don't people participate? Why don't students participate in discussions which are around issues which could be political in nature, which could be slightly controversial in nature? And we realized that if you ask them to write it, they were far more comfortable, at least in our context. And therefore, even the tools of assessment were changed in these ways. Second part, which is the experiential part. So here I'll talk about the programs that we did. The rural engagement program that I spoke about in my presentation. So what we do is, when we send the students out, once again, we measure as to how have they performed. So one is from the group. Every group that goes in as somebody from the administration side who goes with them, coordinate with the village, to coordinate their stay arrangements, and to also ensure the safety. So we asked that person, who's not a part of the institute, he or she is the part of the administration, the district administration of the particular district where that village falls, and he or she gives us a feedback about who performed what. And then subsequently, when they come back, they make a presentation where they talked about what they did, and we asked the other groups to also evaluate this particular work. So through this peer review work of assessment, we try to do things. The other thing that we did in terms of experiential learning, so India, on its north, in the northern part of our country, we have the Himalayan region. And people who live in those mountains have a completely different set of problems. So what we also started was a program called the Himalayan Outbound Program. Where again, all our students would go to the Himalayan regions and live in those places while doing their treks and their adventure training, etc., etc. At the same time, they would try to look at the problems faced by those people. And once again, we followed the same model, that they would come back as groups, and then they would present as to what did they see, the problems that they saw, the solutions that they suggested, and through a peer review system, as well as a mentor who goes with them. So with every group, once again, we have a mentor, and this mentor is a faculty mentor. The mentor himself or herself also gives in some kind of an assessment as to how did a particular group, and within the group, how did students do. So I think we need to look at issues related around this from both the classroom perspective and the experiential perspective, and then figure out ways both of increasing the efficacy as well as the assessment.
Thank you, Himanshu. So we've only got time for one more question. So any questions which have been typed in, we'll pass them on to Himanshu, who will get in touch afterwards. So the final question is, how would you define social impact? Not all societies are like yours. Examples will be different, therefore social impact will be different on a different level.
Yeah. So, social impact, one of the things that we need to be clear about is that the fact is that all of us live in a very different context, and all of us live in a very different socio-cultural context as well. So according to our context, to me, social impact can be defined as, are we making an improvement? Are we making an improvement in terms of the problems which are faced by the community in the context that we live in? To me, as I said, to me, the social impact is, am I making people happier than how I found them as an individual? Likewise, as a business institution, what we need to probably define social impact as is, are we making the community in which we operate happier, healthier? We can pick up any of those multiple parameters available to us. And that, to me, the definition of social impact. As I said, we don't have to necessarily agree on a universal definition, because we all live in very different contexts. And as a business school, as my mission statement, I could have a very different area that I want to focus on. And it would also depend on the kind of competencies that we have as a business school. So maybe I really want to make a difference in a particular term, but I do not have the wherewithal in terms of knowledge or the faculty or the resources to be able to do so. So depending on the competencies that we have, depending on resources that we have, and looking at the ecosystem that we work in, I think all of us will need to define social impact for ourselves.
Thank you, Himanshu. That was excellent. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for today, but all the questions will get passed on to you. Just before we go, I'd like to let everyone know that we've got 2 more sessions taking place today. So the first one will be at 2 o'clock BST with Percy Marquina, Director General from Centrum CP Business School, who will be presenting on innovation in course development through partnerships with the corporate world. After that session, the second one will be at 3:30 BST with Ellen van der Woestnee, Segment Marketing Director for Learning Experiences at Barco, and she'll be presenting on how virtual and hybrid classrooms are transforming online learning. So I've dropped the link in the chat so everyone can use to sign on to the session. Also, I've dropped a link in there so everyone can visit the virtual exhibition and familiarise themselves with our partners and sponsors. Just before we go, I'd like to thank Himanshu again for a great presentation, and I look forward to seeing everyone on a session in the near future.
Sure. Thank you very much.